Hello, I'm not really sure where to start, but I feel as though it's almost my duty to sort of report back from the other side as someone who has survived severe depression, partly to impart some insight as to what it's like, and partly to give people who are struggling whatever hope and support that I can. In case it wasn't already evident, I will be discussing some fairly heavy topics regarding mental health and the will to live. I just wanted to give a bit of a warning, and I also wanted to say that when I do discuss feelings of hopelessness, I want to be clear that hope was always there, even when I couldn't see it. So I suppose I'll just begin with a brief sort of history of what my experience was like, and then talk about my depression symptoms, and then I'll talk a little bit about RTMS, which was the one treatment that ended up working for me. So I'll explain that a little bit, and also just kind of touch on what life is like now. To be honest, I've always kind of struggled to some degree, but the first time I ever expressed openly suicidal ideation was, I believe it was the summer before I started grade 7. I was 12 years old, and my mom was understandably very alarmed, and I believe she actually called a crisis line to ask for advice just on how to deal with this and help me. So that led to me getting an assessment, and at that time I was diagnosed with ADHD and severe social anxiety. Although I did struggle in school somewhat, being in that kind of social environment where I grew up with all these people, I was seeing the same people every day, it kind of gave me a world where I felt like I existed and mattered. Especially as a very shy kid who had trouble reaching out and making connections or bringing people together for myself. Once I'd graduated high school, the transition to university was extremely lonely and isolating. I think I've made this analogy before, but it really does feel like you're done with the main quest and you've been thrust into an open world sandbox, and not everybody likes to play like that. Not that I didn't want to have my own life, but I just didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I felt this pressure to keep moving forward. But I was in this world that was so big and so bereft of familiar people, and it was extremely hard to actually meet anyone or get to know anyone. I felt like I couldn't really make any meaningful connections. I did have some smaller classes, but everything just kind of existed in isolation, and there was no kind of meaningful sense of consistency or familiarity. And I don't know. I know some people really love the university social experience, but I never understood that because my experience was so fundamentally different. Anyways, during that time, a lot of people in my family began dying. I lost my grandma at the beginning, or I graduated high school in 2012, and I lost my grandma at the beginning of 2013. And then I lost my uncle a few months later, and then I lost my grandpa a couple months after that. And it was one of those experiences where, the core, the center of your universe. Like, my grandpa was like the sun that the whole family kind of orbited around and provided light to everyone. And then he was just gone. And I loved him so much. And I loved my grandma and I loved my uncle. And I just, it's hard to express how much they meant to me. But needless to say, that was an extremely hard year for my entire family. And everyone, I remember everyone, kind of had the attitude of good riddance 2013 on New Year's when it was over. But then at the very beginning of 2014, my brother's dad was diagnosed with brain cancer. And that whole year was kind of characterized by his decline and that long goodbye. And then he died at the beginning of 2015. And a couple months after that, his dad, my Opa, died. And then shortly thereafter, I lost all of my pets who'd been with me growing up, Vanilla and Kitty and Snowshoe. And those few years were just such a constant barrage of grief. And I just never experienced death on that scale before. And it all happened essentially at once. And in spite of that grief I was dealing with, I didn't really attribute it to my worsening depression until years later, because I was just trying to keep pushing forward. I wanted to just keep going because that's all I could do, and I know that's what they would have wanted. The day after my grandpa died, I went to my university classes like nothing had happened. And if I could do that, I believed that everything would be fine, that I could kind of prove to him that I was going to be okay and that I would be okay. Because if I was strong enough to keep walking through something that had been absolutely earth-shattering, then surely I could will myself to be unbreakable. So I just kept going, even though I didn't really have any direction. To be honest, I don't really remember feeling anything but sad and empty and alone. I quickly began to lose contact with the friend group that I'd had in high school. I didn't want to be alone, but reaching out and the thought of being around people was also extremely difficult and overwhelming. I went on for as long as I could, but my mental state kept deteriorating. In 2015, I remember I had this final essay I had to write for my art history class, and I found that no matter how hard I tried, I just could not do it. It was like I'd forgotten how to put thoughts together. I tried and tried. I looked up essay templates and tutorials, but it was like I could not get my brain to cooperate in being able to put thoughts and ideas and research together. I couldn't even conceptualize how and where to start. Ultimately, my professor told me after several extensions that my mark in the class was high enough that if I got 0 and didn't do the final essay, I could still pass with a C. And I'm kind of ashamed to say that I just had to take that at that point. although she was very kind and understanding about everything, and I'm really grateful to her for that. Even after that experience, I was still determined to continue because it was really all I had. So I signed up for classes for the next semester and almost immediately encountered much of the same problem. I suppose it could be described as brain fog or executive dysfunction, but it was getting harder and harder to concentrate, to be able to read, retain, and relay information, to problem solve, to be able to conceptualize how to get from A to B. I went from holding my own for most of the previous year to failing at everything almost right out of the gate in the next. At that point, I felt as though I had to accept that I would never be strong or smart enough to graduate university, so I conceded defeat and I dropped out. The struggles I had in school also extended into my personal hobbies and passions, namely art and writing, which I sort of felt were my only window into making friends and connecting with people online as I fell further and further into isolation. I tried to draw, but I just wouldn't know where to start or what to do, despite having been doing this for almost my entire life. It was taking longer and longer for me to finish the pieces I was working on. By the end, I would spend months working on a relatively simple pictures. I would open a Photoshop document and I would just stare at it. I would be overwhelmed, and if I managed to change just a few pixels, that would have been a victory for the day. And because it had become so much more of a challenge, it required a lot more motivation, which was something that I was also struggling to hold on to. Eventually, I felt like even art had been taken from me, no matter how hard I tried or how much I wanted to draw. I started to think about dying every single day as I struggled to find joy in the things that used to be meaningful to me. All of my thoughts had kind of become very cold and logical, but beneath that, I was also starting to believe things that I kind of recognized on a rational, logical level didn't really make sense, but I still couldn't rationalize my way out of them, no matter how hard I tried. I actually found this letter that I wrote to a psychiatrist that I went to see sometime, I think around 2016. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that I have this bit of insight into the way I was feeling in that moment instead of looking back on it. So I'll read you some of it. I don't trust my ability to express the honest extent of my feelings on the spot, so I wanted to write some things down. Everything feels empty to me. I know that sounds very melodramatic, but even things I enjoy doing seem meaningless to me now. I tried telling myself that it's all in my head and that my life can have meaning if I choose to give it meaning. There are times when I do feel more normal, but I can never really get away from it. I often wish that nobody loved me, so I wouldn't feel an obligation to keep existing. It's not necessarily that I actively want to kill myself, although I have thought about it. It's hard to explain, but it's like I regret ever having been born, and I wish I could somehow retroactively choose to pull the plug on the entirety of my existence. I want to be honest here, but it's hard. because I hate admitting to all this. I know it's for the best, but I'm terrified that I'm going to be perceived as fishing for attention and pity, and I'm ashamed that I haven't been able to fix this by myself. I try to keep moving forward and keep myself busy by getting up every day to take care of the dog and do things around the house. I don't want to look weak, but I'm starting to feel like I'm dealing with a bit of a double-edged sword. I don't want to give up and give in because, in my mind, that would be one of the weakest and most shameful things I could do. On the other hand, however, I feel that as long as I'm trying my best to keep going, no one will ever take me seriously, no matter how bad things are on the inside, as long as I appear to be able to function day to day and don't do anything harmful or alarming. If and when I reach out for help, I'll be written off as either a hypochondriac or an attention seeker. I've actually thought that I should call a crisis line on a number of occasions, but I didn't, because what would I even say? Hi, I want to kill myself, but I'm not actually going to. Please help me. Hey, sorry to interrupt in editing. I just wanted to make it clear that, yes, my younger self absolutely could have called a crisis line and said that. Despite often being referred to as suicide crisis or prevention lines, helplines exist to offer people support with any range of issues from anxiety to addiction to abuse and beyond. So I'll post some resources in the description if you are interested or need them. But uh, yeah, I just wanted to be clear about that. Sorry. Back we go. What would be the point? I'd just be wasting time and resources that could be used for someone who's actually in immediate danger, just so I could hear more of what I already know. Something needs to change drastically, but I don't know where to start. I hate complaining when I know there are others worse off than me. I really do wish I didn't have to come here and that I could take control of it on my own. I keep trying to reach for some sort of epiphany. I know this is all in my head, so maybe if I can figure out how to shift my bad attitude, I can make some sort of breakthrough and fix everything. I feel like I've dug myself into a hole I can't get out of, and I honestly don't know what to do anymore. That psychiatrist told me that depression was caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, and if I could have overcome it by sheer willpower alone, I would have done it already. Which I already kind of knew to be the case on a scientific level, but just being able to hear that from a professional was extremely validating when I'd been fighting and questioning myself for so long. She suggested trying to replace the Zoloft I'd been taking for the past several years with an SNRI. And at the time, I had a lot of hope that that would maybe be the breakthrough I needed to kind of take control of this for myself. I also went through more cognitive behavioral therapy after that, and I have learned a lot of interesting and applicable, helpful things from the different types of therapy I've been through over the years, but none of it really seemed to affect the root of the depression itself, and my condition just continued to snowball, it seemed. I went back and forth a lot about how much I should disclose about what I was like at my lowest point, because frankly, it's embarrassing. But when I try to take a step back and look at it in perspective, I would not look down on anybody else who was going through these types of struggles with self-care, because I know firsthand how hard it was. So, I don't want other people to beat themselves up. And I guess I'm trying to set an example by taking ownership of it and just saying, I know it was hard, but I survived it, and you have too. And that's huge, even though it might not seem to that way to someone who doesn't understand. I understand, and I see that. Anyways, like I said, it really became a massive struggle to take care of myself. Even just taking a shower felt like a huge undertaking that required extensive effort and planning. I would wear the same clothes for weeks on end, only switching my pajama bottoms out for jeans when I would take my dog Winnie out every day. And then I would switch back before bed. At one point, I ended up getting a UTI, which I assume my personal hygiene struggles contributed to. Honestly, the biggest motivator for self-care was Winnie. Just knowing that there was a little person who depended on me gave me a reason to get up and kind of get dressed every day so that I could go outside and play with her in the yard and take her on walks. Even when I couldn't do it for myself, I could do it for her. As things got worse, I started experiencing more symptoms of psychosis. I would have hallucinations and delusions, and it's strange because it's kind of difficult to conceptualize and explain that frame of mind when I'm on the outside of it. Essentially, I had this conviction that I should just end myself because all the people that I loved or cared about or potentially wanted to become closer to hated me and were plotting against me. They were all conspiring behind my back, and anytime they were kind to me, it was part of their plot to humiliate me. Part of me recognized that my own brain was actually the one that was truly conspiring against me, but even then, I couldn't break free of it. Like I say, it's kind of a bizarre and confusing frame of mind to try to describe, but it's like just being aware that something is wrong doesn't automatically make it right. I would lie awake crying as I tried to rationalize my way out of it, but it would just not let go. It was like I was in a cage and I could see the world outside the cage, and I understood that I was in a cage, but that still didn't give me the key to open the door and escape. I also believed a lot of strange things during that time. I would see numbers and think they were divine messages or omens. And I think this was even after this, I don't know, I feel like this seed was kind of planted by the number 13 and 2013 being the beginning of all of this. And the last time my grandpa went to the emergency room, they put him in bed number 13, and that really got in my head, and everything just kind of spiraled from there. I would often also feel bugs crawling all over my skin, and I had this genuine belief that it was my fault everyone died, and that I had the ability to kill people with my mind by thinking the wrong thoughts, and I was a genuine danger to others, and that I shouldn't exist. Panic attacks were also an almost daily occurrence at that point as well. They would just kind of happen for no reason. I'd be sitting there doing something completely innocuous, and then suddenly I would feel my muscles tense and my heart would be pounding, and I'd feel like I couldn't breathe or that I wasn't getting enough oxygen. And there was really nothing to do but just kind of sit there and wait it out. But mostly I spent every day just thinking about how much I wanted to escape this existence. I don't really want to go into too much detail about what I was thinking or planning, because having been in that frame of mind, I don't want to give anybody the wrong sort of inspiration. But there was a certain idea and kind of scene in my mind that I kept fixating on. And what started out as just wondering quickly became longing, and then planning and waiting. The main thing that kept me here was my mum. Even when my mind was telling me that everyone hated me, I knew how much it would hurt her if I died, even more than I was hurting her already. I clung to that. I used it to rationalize. I thought, wait, if I know that it would hurt her, then I cannot deny how much she loves me. And if that's true, then maybe I am capable of being loved. And my fear of hurting her is also an expression of love. And therefore, I too must still be capable of loving. That realization was like a single sunbeam through an impenetrable wall of clouds. It was all I had to fight with, but it was something. Knowing that she believed me and supported me and loved me and wanted to help me get help was ultimately what saved me. Like I've said, over the years, I tried multiple different types of therapy and medication. I wanted to get better. I always made a concerted effort, but nothing I tried really seemed to make a dent. I fought against myself to hold on to hope that I couldn't really see or feel, to believe the seemingly impossible, that the door that depression had opened in my mind could be closed again, and that it was still possible to have a life on the other side. And it was my mum who found out about the RTMS program. There was a segment on it on the morning news before I'd even woken up, and she called immediately to try to get me in.
Doctors here are using repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, or RTMS, to activate neurons and regulate brain function in patients who experience bouts of major depression. It's a non-invasive way of stimulating a person's brain tissue. A magnetic field is generated, then passed through a coil where it penetrates deep into the target region of the patient's brain.
I'm always super nervous and hesitant to try filming anything in public. So I always try to be really quick and sneaky about it. But I do have a few images and videos if you'd like to see a bit of what it looks and sounds like. One of the first things I very distinctly remember noticing, it wasn't as though this veil was instantly lifted, and I just went, oh, hey, I feel fine now. But I do recall just one day thinking, hey, wait a minute, it's been several days now, and I haven't thought about dying. It was a surreal experience to kind of take in and realize that, wow, maybe this is actually working. After going so many years with hope met with no significant changes to my condition. And throughout those first 3 weeks of treatment, I did begin to experience true hope and motivation again. I found myself making actual progress on the pictures I was trying to work on, and the panic attacks and paranoia dissipated as well. It was incredible. After years of failed treatments, something had actually worked. It was truly like a miracle. Looking back on that time in my life, I will admit that. Oh, wait, did I mention? I think it was in 2018. 2018 was when I had my first treatment. And I will admit that looking back on that time of my life, it did kind of take me another few years to really just learn how to be a person again. I'd been in that state for so long that even afterwards, I still had work to do in terms of just learning to control my emotions and interact and connect with other people again. There was also a part of me for a long time that lived in constant fear that it was too good to be true, that I was going to relapse one day and then it wouldn't help anymore, and that would be the end. There would be nothing left for me. So as I was trying to rebuild my life, there was also this fear that I could lose it again at any day. I don't really feel that way so much anymore, but it's really only been in the past couple years that it stopped nagging at me, and I've really been able to accept that I am treatable and that I can and will be okay. It has continued to be like a miracle for me, and there's so much that I'm glad I lived to experience. There are so many small, everyday things that I find myself marveling at because it's just so wonderful and precious that I lived to see them. Life after such a long period of illness hasn't been without its struggles. The biggest thing probably being that I kind of missed the entirety of my 20s, and now I have none of the employment and academic experience that I'm expected to, and I'm struggling to catch up. It's been extremely hard to find work, especially with how competitive the market is now, even for entry-level jobs, and the fact that AI is being used to sift through resumes, which is a whole other thing. I've also aged out of a lot of the programs that might have been able to help me. And I will admit that the RTMS doesn't really help me in the employability department because I need maintenance sessions every few months. So, it's been hard to find an employer who's willing to, schedule around a week where I have to go to the hospital every day. every few months. And I don't want to complain. I'm still trying. I'm still applying for things. I'm still trying to figure out what my life can be. And I'm so excited that I actually have the opportunity to do so. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. But even just watching this video and making it this far makes a huge difference. Thank you. I'm fighting a different battle now, but I still have a lot of uncertainty about my future. And if I could achieve monetization to get even a tiny bit of revenue back from the time and effort I put in these videos to help support my family, it would be an absolute godsend. It would kind of, at the very least, give me a little bit of a checkpoint where I could set down just a little bit of the stress and uncertainty I've been carrying around and give me a little bit more room to breathe and to really think about things. It's also given me a lot of real life insight of how hard it can be to come out of recovery or to have any kind of disability and be trying to find a way to support yourself or your family without any real connections. Community does make a huge impact, and it can be hard to even know what resources are available to you when you're all on your own. I still have low points, but even in my worst relapse, things never got as bad as they had been prior to RTMS. After I began to recover, however, my mom became extremely sick. I might talk about this in more detail at some other point, but it was one of the hardest things I've been through. And there's a reason I'd like to tell this story. For about 2 years, I just watched her get weaker and weaker. But she was so sick that she would fall asleep, and I'd have to go check to make sure she was still breathing. She ended up spending 6 months in the ICU. And there was a time I'd go visit her in the hospital every day, and then I'd say goodbye to her, not knowing if that would be the last time I was ever going to see her. She was so weak and sick that she almost didn't qualify for a lung transplant, but she fought so hard in the hospital to get stronger that the transplant team here in Winnipeg actually sort of appealed to the transplant team in Edmonton, where the surgery would be taking place, to give her a chance. The transplant itself and the recovery process was also a very harrowing experience, and I can definitely see why doctors can't consider people who are already too far gone for surgery, because you need to be able to survive it, essentially. And I watched her almost die several times again during recovery. But she did recover, and she's still here, and there are a number of reasons, or at least 2 reasons I wanted to share this story. One, I think it's a testament to how effective that RTMS was, that I was able to endure all of that and kind of try to carry that stress for her and stay positive and supportive and still come out the other side with joy and excitement for life. And number 2 is that it's maybe the most important item on the list of things that I'm grateful that I survived to experience. To have been able to care for the person who cared for me, to have been able to have been there when she needed me. Her illness was something I could never have foreseen, but I'm so grateful that I was still here and that I could still be there for her. part of the reason it was so important for me just to make this video was so that I could hopefully tell somebody else who needed to hear it that they're not alone, that your struggle to hold on is worth it, even if you can't see how yet. Even though my life now isn't perfect and I still have a lot of struggles to contend with to get my life back on track, I think I'm happier now than I've ever been. And part of that is just because I'm able to recognize each moment of joy with far more clarity now. Even if nothing has worked for you yet, remember that there are new treatments being researched and developed every single day, and that there are people who understand what you're going through, how hard you've been fighting, and what it's taken from you. But I promise you, there is a world on the other side, and it's real, and the door can be closed on that bleak, empty facsimile of reality that it seems as though you can't unsee. Wishing you the best of luck and the most unshakable of strength. I see you.